Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. Today, it's a real treat. We're joined by Natalie McGuinness. Natalie, you're very welcome to the show. Let's begin by asking you maybe to give us a little bit of an introduction and help our international audience understand a little bit about the work that you're involved in. So over to you, Natalie. You're very welcome.
Thank you so much, Simon. You're so kind. As you said, my name is Natalie McGuinness. I'm the Director of Marketing and Business Development at Mason Hayes Curran, and that's a very successful law firm based in Ireland. So during my time at the firm, it's tripled in size and tripled in revenue. So as I always say, I don't take all the credit, but certainly maybe take a little bit of that. But prior to that, I probably had quite an eclectic career because I literally started out on the shop floor selling mobile phones, and then I worked my way all the way up to the 45th floor of the Roppongi Tower in Tokyo, where I was dealing with international content strategies for Vodafone. So yeah, a little bit eclectic.
Thank you very much indeed for setting that context. Before we get into a few questions, I definitely want to ask you. I want to ask you about today's busy world, because obviously from a legal and a law perspective, I know you're involved in lots of different areas and industry sectors. But from a personal perspective, can you tell me a bit more about how you onboard information? Maybe tell me a little bit about how you learn in today's busy world. Are you, I mean, we're on a podcast today, we're on the show. Are you a regular, listener or watcher of podcasts? Are you an avid book reader? How does social media play a part in your world, or doesn't it? What's it like when it comes to onboarding information, Natalie?
Well, I suppose I'm guilty of all of those, or innocent, depending on your point of view. I would probably just describe myself as a knowledge aardvark. I'm one of those people who kind of snuffles along, like gathering up new data, new perspectives. I mean, I am relentlessly curious. I'm the person who never grew out of the why phase. I just kept going with it. I mean, in terms of onboarding, it's probably a mix of formal and informal for me. Very much that Stephen Coveney attitude of sharpen the saw. So kind of formal education, three-time graduate from UCD, but probably the MBA was the most instrumental for me. Because as a marketeer, it gave me a lot of confidence, and it gave me the language of business. Because as you know, marketing can sometimes be, as an old CFO used to call it, the department of coloring in, or, the people who put bows on things. But the reality is that brand and marketing are the key value drivers for some of the largest companies in the world. And like none of us are going out spending 500 quid on a Louis Vuitton baseball hat because someone put a bow on it. That's the power of marketing, and that's the power of brand, and being able to articulate that and represent with other business people via what I learned in the MBA was great. And then the kind of the informal learning, it's all of the stuff that you mentioned. And also, along with the podcasts and the books, I love going to events. And that's for two reasons. I love hearing what the speakers have to say, and also the conversations that you have, because even if the speaker is useless, you'll always walk away with something. You'll always meet someone, that just little moment of serendipity that you have, and you walk away richer from it.
Well, thank you for sharing that information as well. So we've got a bit of a context now in terms of the work that you're involved in and the way that you onboard information. If I can maybe just come back to your role today, because you're talking about marketing there, and there's sort of building a brand, then there's sort of lead generation and everything in between. But I know that your current work, you focus on things like energy and technology and financial services, the built environment, and of course, healthcare and life sciences. I know you do a lot in international areas as well. How does your role, could you maybe unpack your role a little bit more? How does that marketing and the role that you do play into those sort of sectors and the sort of day-to-day activities that you have to make sure happen?
Well, I'm particularly pleased that you mentioned the sectors, because that was one of my babies back in the day. long after I started, we did quite a bit of market research, and what we discovered that was very high on the client agenda was understanding their business and understanding their market. They had no interest in paying for somebody's learning curve. And also they didn't really care what department a lawyer was in, whether you're in IP or corporate, where you sat in the building was completely irrelevant to them. So we changed how we marketed ourselves from very much kind of practice, legal technical focus, to very much that sector, and really demonstrating that, we understood their business, we understood the challenges, we were looking ahead for them. And then around that, we had to work on translating what is quite complex legal knowledge into very consumable content. So along with kind of the generation revenue and the brand awareness, there's really been a lot of work on content. And I never thought I would be such an integral part of the knowledge economy, but that is a core part of my role at the moment.
And last question on that is, I know you obviously got a place in Highland, of course, but you've also got offices in London and New York and San Francisco. I'm thinking of technology in particular and the sort of spread that has around the world. When you're doing the work that you do and you're looking at that type of content, do you have to think a lot more internationally these days because the internet almost knows no boundaries? We're in a world of artificial intelligence now, and I'm just wondering what it's like when you're trying to talk to companies that are maybe coming to the discussion from different languages, cultures, international mix.
Yeah, it's a very good question. We have to follow the market. Ireland, as you know, is a small open economy. So we go where the clients are, or where the clients are coming from. So we have representative offices in those markets. And I suppose moving a lot of our content online and marketing online, as you said, it is without borders, and it gives us a lot of reach. And particularly for clients in the US, the difference between US law and Irish law, European law, can be quite, significant. In America, you can fire someone on the spot. In Ireland, it might take 9, maybe 12 months to go through that process. So, you have to work with the international clients and contacts and just help them understand what are the differentials and how they can navigate that and just themselves and their business safe.
Thank you for sharing that, Natalie. And in your line of work, is there anybody that you admire, or maybe somebody who's given you some advice along the way, or even any advice you'd like to share with our international audience?
I mean, I've been lucky. I've met a lot of people throughout my career who and personal life as well, who have been quite inspirational. I think probably the one thing for me is very much about getting outside of my comfort zone. So I'd say that's kind of the trait or the habit that I've taken, and that I would encourage, others to take. As I mentioned earlier, I've kind of done a lot of different courses in my life. And on one of them, I ended up talking to someone who'd just come back from Rally International, which is a charity which works with disadvantaged youths, among others. And it just sounded like the most incredible adventure. And I don't know, just lodged somewhere in my brain. And a couple of years later, I thought, you know what? I might go for that. So I applied to Rally, and they rang me and they said, right, we'd love to offer you a job as a project manager. It'll be in Borneo, and it'll be starting in January. And I went, that's brilliant, love it. Quit my job, and quickly went off to Google, where is Borneo? Because at the time, was not your typical jungle girl. I didn't even own a pair of flat shoes, let alone a pair of hiking boots. But anyway, I packed my rucksack and off I went. And as you'd probably expect, it was the adventure of a lifetime. Living in a rainforest was completely spectacular, waking up to the dawn chorus. every single day. Like no day. I know people say, oh, no days are the same, but genuinely, no days were the same. I mean, one, we ended up hiding from pygmy elephants. You know, they are unusually aggressive despite their size. Another, you'd be watching orangutans play. Another day, somebody cut their hand open with a machete, so I ended up having to stitch it back together, which I can tell you was not something I learned on the MBA. But it was just a wonderful experience, and it introduced me to just such diversity of people and such diversity of thought that I kind of had never really experienced up until that. So yeah, those kind of things where you get out of your comfort zone, like that's where the magic happens. That's where the exponential learning is.
Thank you for sharing that. That sounds like quite an adventure, Natalie, and always a good balance to business. But I know the minute you hit the ground, at least I think I'm right in saying this, you had a lot of conferences as well. You've done a lot of planning as well, I think, over the summer months. Did you do energy and dispute conferences? That seems to be quite a busy thing on your agenda.
Yeah, I mean, as a core part of what we do in the firm, are the events, and some of those we do in person and some of those we do online. What we really try and focus on is the topical issues, or as we say, the thing that's keeping people up at night. So energy, as you can imagine, it's a huge area of focus, particularly around sustainable energy. And what we focused on this month was how you finance that, because you know these things don't come cheap. And then there's a lot of logistics involved in it. Our team have been working on renewable energy probably since the very start. I think it's the first and the biggest wind farm, the first and the biggest solar farm, the first offshore license. So they know what they're talking about. And it's great to hear their insights, because they're at the forefront of what's going on at the market. And then disputes, again, totally different. But that's looking at changes in the market. Our class action is going to come into Ireland. That'll be quite seismic if it does happen. I know in the States it's very common, but over here it'll be quite unusual. So again, it's just helping people to understand, what's happening and what's coming down the track.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing a little bit of insight into what happens there. Now, I know we certainly don't have time to get into all of the different activities that you're involved in, because I know you sit on a number of councils and important boards, and one in particular, the St. Patrick's Day Festival, is known around the world. Could you maybe just share a little bit about your sort of other activities that you're involved in? Because there's some wonderful things that I'm sure you're engaged in there that you could maybe share with our audience today.
Yeah, I know it sounds unusual, but a couple of years ago, I was very conscious of, trying to keep myself fresh, trying to keep myself engaged. Um, and because when you've been in a job a few years ago, no matter how good it is, you can fall victim to groupthink, or things like that. So I deliberately went out and sought opportunities to become involved in other businesses and other organizations. And now I was already on the council of Dublin Chamber, which was amazing. And from there, I went on to the board of Dublin Chamber, and then the board of Chambers Ireland. And then from there on to the St. Patrick's Festival, and just understanding how those different organizations work, what their priorities are, what their challenges are. In my day-to-day job, I certainly don't have to think about the logistics of fencing off O'Connell Street and trying to get a float underneath the Lewis line. But that's something that's really important when you're trying to organize a festival in Dublin that the entire world is watching. Or if you're trying to decide, what are the policy priorities for the budget, what's impacting Dublin business, what do we need to do to make the city a better place? And that's from the very small, to the very big.
No, thanks. And you've taken us on a wonderful tour, because as well as sort of the day job, if I can use that in inverted commas, you've taken us with a backpack to fixing people who've had an injury with a machete to one of the biggest well-known festivals in the world. And it is great, isn't it, sometimes, particularly in the current environment, that you need sort of that external stimulus, you need that different type of thinking. And I loved what you said about having different inputs so you don't get stuck in sort of a group think or almost a siloed way of approaching things. Um, so thank you very much indeed for giving us that insight here on today's show. Something I like to ask all my guests is, what do they think about for the next year ahead? Are you meticulously planning? Is it a 6, 12 month sort of horizon? What's on your roadmap? Where do you see some of the challenges or opportunities? Or, how does that work in your world, Natalie?
Yeah, I'm a big planner. I always have been. I mean, I like to have an end goal. I like to have an end point. Now that could be 3, 5, maybe even 10 years in the future. I spent a bit of time working in Japan, and the thing I loved about working in Japan is that they were so future focused. They were doing 50-year plans when we were doing 5-year plans. They knew they had an aging demographic, so they were building all the technology into the network at the time that would support remote living and remote healthcare, 30, 40, 50 years down the track. So that kind of planning, I've taken that with me in the rest of my career. And I do like to have kind of a clear focus of where I'm getting to. I mean, how I get there, the tactics, yeah, fine. They're going to change. You know, things like global pandemics happen, and you have to react, and that's good, and I like that dynamism. uh, but the thing that's influencing everyone at the moment is artificial intelligence and Gen AI, and that's going to come as no surprise to you. So we're just figuring out where we are and where we're going with that at the moment. So we're building our own private cloud. We're looking at prompts, we're looking at training data, we're looking at our guardrails, and that's very interesting. It's really exciting to see what you can do with that, um, and also what'll that enable you to do. Because if you can get the AI to do this, then what's your role in that? And I think all of us are looking at a tsunami of of content and communications in the coming year. So what's going to be really important there is the people who can control the quality, and the people that you can trust to deliver the right content at the right time. So I think it's that level of sophistication that we need to build into our practices now for the future, because it's going to become so overwhelming for absolutely all of us. And then on the absolute flip side of that, I know this is going to sound a bit curious, but it's something that's close to my heart. It's trying to stay analog in a digital world, because sometimes you can get totally carried away with the technology, and can forget that fundamentally it's people dealing with people. Like when I used to stand on the shop floor and someone used to come in, they weren't coming in to buy a mobile phone. I mean, they were, but they weren't. They were coming in to buy status. They were coming in to buy security. They were coming in to buy communication. And you had to understand what's you had to have that conversation. You have to understand what's that driver, what do they want, what do they need. And it's that people piece that's really important. So although I am gung-ho on the tech, I'm gung-ho on the AI and the systems, personally, I want to lean more into that people piece. I want to lean more into those, I don't want to call them soft skills. I want to call them human skills, because I do think that that's going to be the differentiator. And I think the people with those skills are going to be the ones with superpowers in the future.
Yeah, I do like that a lot. I think there's something very magical about human superpowers, and I think that's going to be a very valuable commodity as we go forward. I couldn't agree more. Thanks very much indeed for sharing your thoughts there. Um, Look, finally, Natalie, before we run out of time, I have two quick questions for you. Number one is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to share with our audience? Or maybe it's a parting thought or something you've already mentioned that you want to expand on. And secondly, as well as giving us your sort of final thoughts here, if people want to find out more about you, your company, what you do, where's the best place to point them to? Is it a website? Is it LinkedIn? What works best for you?
Okay, there's a lot there. Um, I mean, I think for me, it's really about staying curious and it's about staying connected because what we have that separates us from the machines, it's our human ability to innovate and it's our ability, to connect those uncommon dots and to see those kind of invisible patterns and connections. I've always tried to do that in my life. I've always tried to get the two and the two and make five. When I went to Japan, I was trying to sell international content to the Japanese. That wasn't good, but I was able to find something. I was able to combine it with their technology, and it worked. The same when COVID happened, which, as we know, was horrific. It was just trying to bring all of our content and all of our knowledge into a new world, into a new online environment. I mean, I worked it out there the other day. We're producing somewhere between 300 and 400 hours of content at the moment, which is the same as every episode of The Simpsons since 1987, except we're now doing that every year. Now, if you had told me that 5 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you. So, because you can't see what's going to happen, I think staying plugged in and staying connected, I think that's the most important thing. And just stay curious. In terms of connecting, we have our website, so it's mhc.ie for the company. And personally, I'm on LinkedIn at Natalie McGuinness.
Well, thank you, Natalie. You've given us an awful lot to think about there. And I was reminded of your conversation about building your own data cloud. And I think in that sort of expert legal advice world, that's really important. And I loved what you said about providing quality as well, and that human um, valuable commodity that you touched on as well. That's wonderful. And I want to thank you for being a guest today on the Global Discussion. I think you've given us an awful lot to consider and think about, and also give us a little bit of insight into your world. And that's been wonderful. Before we wrap up, I want to thank everybody who's watching or listening to this episode. And I hope that they follow, like, subscribe, do everything I need them to do to help support the show. And hopefully they'll join me back here for some more discussions with great creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Natalie. But Natalie, thanks for being on the show. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today.
You too, Simon. Thanks for the opportunity. I've loved it.